Hello, this is Steve again, and I'm going to read you a story written by Patrick McManus. The Night the Bear Ate Goomba. I used to read it to my kids when they were young, just before going to bed. And after reading it, they were a little bit more difficult going to bed than they usually are after quite a bit of laughing. I'm going to see if you might enjoy this. So here's The Night the Bear Ate Goomba by Patrick McManus. There was so much confusion over the incident anyway that I don't want to add to it by getting the sequences mixed up. First of all, I remember this clearly. It was the summer after Crazy Eddie Muldoon and I had been sprung from third grade at Delmore Blight Grade School. The Muldoons' only good cow died that summer, shortly after the weasel got in their chicken house and killed most of the laying hens. This was just before the fertilizer company Mr. Muldoon worked for went bankrupt, and he lost his job. The engine on his tractor blew up a week later, so he couldn't harvest his crops, which were all pretty much dried up from the drought anyway. Then Mr. Muldoon fell into the pit trap that Crazy Eddie and I had dug to capture wild animals. Our plan was to train the wild animals and then put on shows to earn a little extra money for the family. But Mr. Muldoon fell into the trap and afterwards made us shovel all the dirt back into it. The only wild animal we had trapped was a skunk, and when Mr. Muldoon fell in on top of it, he terrified the poor creature practically to death. Neither Mr. Muldoon nor the skunk was hurt much, but the skunk managed to escape during all that excitement. So there went our wild animal show. This occurred about midsummer. As I recall, about the time Mr. Muldoon's nerves got so bad that old Doc Hicks told him to stop drinking coffee, which apparently was what had brought on his nervous condition. For the rest of the summer, Mr. Muldoon gave off a faint, gradually fading odor of skunk, unless he got wet. Then the odor reconstructed itself to approximately its original power, which placed a major restraint on the Muldoon social life, meager as that was. Fortunately, Mr. Muldoon didn't get wet after that often, maybe because of the drought that had killed off his crops. As Mrs. Muldoon was fond of saying, every cloud has a silver lining. So far, it had been a fairly typical summer for Mr. Muldoon, but he claimed to be worried about a premonition that his luck was about to turn bad. Then Eddie's grandmother, Mrs. Muldoon's mother, showed up for a visit. I knew it, Mr. Muldoon told a neighbor. I knew something like this was about to happen. I must be psychic. After I got to know Eddie's grandmother a little better, I could see why Mr. Muldoon regarded her visit as a stroke of bad luck. She immediately assumed command of the family and began to boss everyone around, including me. Nevertheless, I doubted that Mr. Muldoon was actually psychic, because otherwise he would never have come up with the idea of the camping trip. I'm worried about Pa, Eddie said one morning as we sat on his back porch. He's not been himself lately. Who's he been? I asked, somewhat startled, although I regarded Mr. Muldoon as one of the oldest persons I knew. Pa's just started acting weird, that's all. You know what crazy idea he came up with this morning? He says we all gotta go on a camping trip up to the mountains and pick huckleberries. He says that we can sell any extra huckleberries we get for cash. But Pa don't know anything about camping. We don't even have any camping stuff. Ain't that strange? Yeah, I said. Say, Eddie, you don't suppose your pa, I tried to think of a delicate way to phrase it. What, Eddie said? You don't suppose your pa would let me go on the camping trip too, do you? When Eddie put that question to his father, Mr. Muldoon tried to conceal his affection for me beneath a malevolent frown. Oh, all right, he growled at me, but no mischief. That means no knives, no hatchet, no matches, no slingshot, and no shovels. Understood? Eddie and I laughed. It was good to see his father in a humorous mood once again. I rushed home and asked my mother if I could go camping with the Muldoons. You'd be away from home a whole week, she said. I'll have to think about that. Okay, you can go. I quickly packed my hatchet, knife, and slingshot along with edibles Mom gave me to contribute to the Muldoon's grub box. The one major item I lacked was a sleeping bag. I'll just make a bedroll out of some blankets off my bed, I informed my mother. You most certainly won't, she informed me. You use the coat. Ah, gee, Ma, the coat's so stupid. Mr. Muldoon will tease me all during the trip if I have to use that stupid coat for a sleeping bag. The coat in question was a tattered, dog-chewed old fur of undetermined species that my grandmother had acquired during a brief period of family wealth in the previous century. It had been given to me as a sleeping bag for my frequent but always aborted attempts at sleeping out alone in the yard. For all its hideous appearance, it was warm and cozy and covered my 9-year-old body nicely from end to end. Still, I knew the Muldoons would laugh themselves silly when they saw me bed down in a woman's fur coat. My only hope of retaining any shred of dignity, not to mention my carefully nursed macho image, was to slip into it after they had all gone to sleep. I stuffed my coat into the gunny sack, concealing it under the one threadbare blanket my mother reluctantly issued me. The day of the big camping trip dawned bright and clear, a common rust of Mother Nature to lure unsuspecting souls out into the wild. The 5 of us piled into the ancient Muldoon sedan and set off for the mountains. Most of our camping gear, such as it was, balanced precariously atop the car. It was wrapped in a huge hay tarp, which was to serve as our tent. Ain't had a drop of rain in 3 months, Mr. Muldoon had said. Probably won't need the tarp. This statement would later be recalled and admitted as evidence in the case against Mr. Muldoon's being psychic. How you doing back there, Goomba? Mr. Muldoon said to Eddie's grandmother. For some reason, everyone called her Goomba. How you think I'm doing, Goomba snapped back. Wedged in between these two sweaty young'uns, I'm boiling in my own juice. This cabin trip is the stupidest dang fool idea you ever came up with. Herbert, well, probably I'll get ate by bears. Tell me, what about bears, Herbert? Yeah, I thought, what about bears? Ha, 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 Mr. Muldoon laughed. You don't have to worry about bears. They're more afraid of humans than we are of them. Well, I thought that's certainly not true of all humans, particularly one that I know personally. It's probably not true of all bears either, but I kept these thoughts to myself, since Goomba was doing a thorough job of grilling Mr. Muldoon on the subject. I could tell that the talk of bears was making Mrs. Muldoon nervous, that she was the only one, not that she was the only one. Let's change the subject, Goomba, she said. Oh, all right. How about mountain lions, Herbert? For the rest of the long, hot, dusty ride up to the huckleberry patches, Goomba hangered Mr. Muldoon about every possible threat to our well-being, from bears to crazed woodcutters. By the time we reached our campsite, she had everyone in such a nervous state that we were almost afraid to get out of the car. Mr. Muldoon stepped out, swiveled his head about as though expecting an attack from any quarter, then ordered us to help set up the camp. No level area for our tent was immediately apparent. But Crazy Eddie and I finally located one. It was down a steep bank on the far side of the little creek. Mr. Muldoon, Eddie, and I dragged the bundle of camp gear down the bank and across a long log to the little clearing in the brush and trees. In no time at all, Mr. Muldoon had constructed a fine shelter out of the tarp. Eddie and I built a fire ring of rocks, and Mrs. Muldoon and Goomba got a fire going and put coffee on to boil, apparently forgetting that the doctor had told Mr. Muldoon to cut down on his coffee drinking because of his nerves. Eddie and I sampled the fishing in the creek. All in all, the camping trip showed signs of becoming a pleasant experience. Then it got dark. I say, keep a fire going all night, Goomba advised. It might help keep the bears off of us. There ain't no bears, Mr. Muldoon said. Now stop worrying about bears. Ha! Bears are more afraid of us than we are of them. Now everybody get a good night's sleep. We got a lot of huckleberries to pick tomorrow. He stripped down to his long underwear and burrowed into the pile of quilts and blankets Mrs. Muldoon had arranged on the ground. I pulled my threadbare blanket out of the gunny sack and spread it out in the dirt next to Goomba. Good heavens, Patrick, Mrs. Muldoon said. It's all you have to sleep in, that one little blanket? The nights can get pretty chilly up here in the mountains. Oh, I've got more blankets in my pack, I lied. If it turns cold, I'll just put some more on, but I'll sleep warm. As the night dragged on into its full depth, I lay there shivering my blankets, studying with considerable interest the looming dark shapes the full moon revealed around our camp. Finally, Goomba and the bull dudes ceased their thrashing about on the hard ground and began to emit the sounds of sleep. I jerked the fur coat out of the gunny sack and buttoned myself into its comforting warmth. I set a mental alarm to awaken me before the bull dudes. So I could conceal the coat before they caught sight of the hideous thing. Then I drifted off into a fitful sleep. "What's that?" Gumbo shouted into my ear. Later she claimed only to be having a nightmare, but fortunately for us, she sounded the alarm just in time. In the silence that followed Goomba's shout, you could almost hear 4 pairs of eyelids popping open in the dark. "A bear!" Goomba shouted. "A bear's got me!" Since I was lying right next to Goomba, this announcement roused my curiosity to no end. I tried to leap to my feet, but, wrapped in the fur coat, could only manage to make it on all fours. "Bear!" screamed Crazy Eddie. "Bear's got goo!" "Bear!" shrieked Mrs. Muldoon. "There it is!" Goomba made a horrible sound. I could make out the big round whites of her eyes fixed on me in the darkness, no doubt pleading wordlessly with me for help. But what can a small boy do against a bear? "Holy beep!" roared Mr. Muldoon. He lunged to his feet, knocking over the ridgepole and dropping the tarp on us and the bear. Figuring Goomba all ready for a counter and myself next to the bear's menu, I tore out from under the tarp just in time to see Mr. Muldoon trying to unstick an axe from the stump in which he had embedded it the night before. Even in the shadowy dimness of moonlight, I could see the look of surprise and horror wash over Mr. Muldoon's face as I rushed toward him for protection. He emitted a strangled cry and rushed off through the woods on legs so wobbly it looked as if his knees had come unhinged. Under the circumstances, I could only surmise that the bear was close on my heels. I raced off after Mr. Muldoon, unable to think of anything better to do. With his abrupt departure, Mr. Muldoon had clearly let it be known that now it was every man for himself. Bounding over a log with effortless ease that accompanies total panic, I came upon Mr. Muldoon peeling bark and limbs off a small tree. Since he was only 4 feet up the tree, I debated briefly whether to wait for him to gain altitude or to find my own tree. When Mr. Muldoon caught sight of the bear closing fast on us, he sprang out of the tree and took off again with me close behind. That I could have reached out and grabbed the snapping flap of his long underwear. The thought did occur to me to do so, but because I was nearing exhaustion, and Mr. Muldoon could have towed me along with his underwear flap. Upon later reflection, however, I think it was well that I didn't grab the flap, for it probably would have been a source of considerable embarrassment to both of us. When I could run no more, I dropped to the ground, deciding I might as well let the bear eat me as run me to death. But the bear was gone. Perhaps he had taken a shortcut through the woods, hoping to cut me and Mr. Muldoon off at the pass. In any case, I never did see the bear. Narrow as my escape had been, sweltering in the fur coat, I took that thing off and stuffed it down a hollow stump, glad to be rid of the thing. When I got back to camp, everyone was gone. I climbed up in the car, inside of which I found Eddie, his mother, and Goomba, each more or less in one piece. "Thank heavens," cried Mrs. Muldoon. "We thought the bear had got you. Have you seen Mr. Muldoon?" I said yes, I had, not mentioning that I had seen even more of him than I cared to. Half an hour later, Mr. Muldoon scrambled up the bank to the car. Upon learning that everyone was intact, he explained how he had led the bear away from camp at a considerable risk to himself. I was surprised that he neglected to mention my whole role in leading the bear off, but didn't think it my place to mention it. "You got to keep a cool head during a bear attack," Mr. Muldoon exclaimed. "Panic and you're done for." "Whee!" Goomba said. "I smell skunk. Somebody step on a skunk in the dark." Then it started to rain hard. That's the one I read my kids, and they laughed pretty hard. I laughed a lot harder when I was with them, because it was more enjoyable reading to them than it is a camera. But maybe you might enjoy this. Patrick McManus, The Night the Bear Ate Goomba. Enjoy.